Hey, Catherine. How you doing?
I'm good, Max. How are you?
I'm doing good. I've been so excited to have this conversation ever since we kind of were throwing some ideas together over LinkedIn. So I'm super pumped to have you joining me today and to be with you today to talk about some stuff that I think a lot of people are struggling with today, and that's remote onboarding, remote training, virtual facilitation. Because now we're all in the world where we just have to do it. It's no longer a nice to have. It's a must have. So before we get too deep into it, can you just kind of like tell everyone watching like a little bit about yourself, and then I'll kind of explain kind of what I do, and then maybe we'll tell people how we originally met, and then we can kind of go from there.
Okay, cool.
Sure.
So I'm Catherine Nicholson from the virtual training team. There's a bit of a clue in the title of our company as to what we do. I've been running training virtually for around 10 years alongside face-to-face delivery. I found it really challenging to begin with, I have to confess, but stuck with it and learned to love it and learned lots of ways of making it hopefully really effective for the learners and their experience and the outcomes. And so 4 years ago, we decided to create the virtual training team as an organization to focus purely on the design and the delivery of virtual training and training other trainers like you on how to do the same. So that's how we met.
Yep, totally. And for anyone who doesn't know who I am, I'm Max. I am a product trainer at HubSpot. So I help run the onboarding program for new hires that come to work at HubSpot, along with our awesome learning and development team. And yeah, the way we met, Catherine, is you came and you did a masterclass for us on virtual facilitation. And, I have to tell you, and like, maybe you've heard me say this already just because I've been singing your praises on LinkedIn for a while now. But, I knew pretty much nothing about virtual instructor-led training before we had our masterclass. And like, I am only able to do what I do today, like strictly because of that time that I spent with you. So first of all, I want to thank you for that. That was probably one of the best trainings I've ever went through in my entire life. And I am a comfortable, confident virtual instructor because of you. And I can say the same for a lot of folks on our team as well. The feedback that we got from like your training that you did for us was just like unbelievably positive. So, finally I get a chance to thank you in person for that. So that was awesome. But we've been chatting a little bit on LinkedIn for a while now, just kind of in the crazy world that we're all living in, and I'm sure you guys are all seeing it too. Talk to us like a little bit about the activity that you've all seen at your company since we've all kind of been plunged into this, COVID world where we're all working remotely, we're all onboarding remotely, we're all training remotely. What's that experience been like for you guys on your end?
Where do I start? So we've seen different organizations experience this whole time in very different ways. So some of our clients they've gone financially on lockdown. They've said we're not spending anything. Some have gone lockdown on training altogether. It's like it's not a priority, we just need to survive.
Yeah.
Whereas other organizations have been coming to us saying, help, in order to survive, we need to learn how to train virtually. So for example, you've got organizations like HubSpot where you're onboarding people virtually. And then there are other organizations where they might sell a particular product or service that requires them to train their customers virtually on how to use the product. Whereas they would have done that previously face to face. So in order to keep on selling, they've had to learn how to design and deliver virtually. So that's been really interesting. What we've also seen as well is a lot of companies just said to their staff, like, you need to work from home now. You've got the internet, you've got a laptop, there you go. Some have been really, really supportive in helping their employees learn how to work remotely and virtually and giving them the support. And others haven't. We've seen people really really struggling actually to make that transition. Going through the whole change, the uncertainty, and then just the practicalities of working from home with maybe a partner that's working from home as well, maybe kids, then you've got pets running around in the background. So that's changed. And something else that's been really positive from all of this is people just turning on their cameras
Mm-hmm.
and letting their colleagues into their home and not being bothered by the fact that their roots are showing and that, you know, they haven't put their makeup on this morning and there might be a bit of a mess in the background. Yeah,
Look at all this.
It's really quite intimate, isn't it? We're really getting to know each other in a way that, you know, when do we go into our work colleagues' homes?
Yeah.
Previously, but now we are. So yeah, lots of changes, and I'm really intrigued. I'd love to know your thoughts on this, Max.
Yeah.
When we started to come out of this, it's not going to go back how it was, not a chance.
No. And that's what I was just talking to this company that's making onboarding software, and we were just like literally going through this conversation here where it's like, okay, so before, the whole idea of like remote work was, you know, if you were a experienced employee in your industry and like you had some, you know, some time under your belt, like in a job or whatever, it's almost as if you had to kind of like earn the right to say like, hey, I have the confidence and the right now to go to employers and say like, I'm only going to work for you if you let me do it remotely and if you let me train remotely and like all this stuff. But now that's everybody. Right. And there's going to be plenty of people, of course, like when this is, I'm going to say all over in quotations, just because like we don't know when that's going to happen or what the new normal is going to look like. There's going to be plenty of people, sure, that like need to be in an office, want to go back to the office, will do everything they can to get back into the office. But there's also going to be that many more people that maybe weren't so cool with working remotely before, but now kind of dig it. Right. And know that this is the new normal and like this is acceptable and maybe it's easier than they thought it was going to be. And so like the ability to allow your employees to work from home is going to be way more of a standard than it was before. Because I think it was really, really starting to like build up, like us, even at HubSpot, we were, you know, rejiggering our entire onboarding experience to be more remote friendly because like, you know, we were losing out on talent that didn't want to work here because we didn't have like remote onboarding options, you know, and weren't as remote friendly. And now after this, it's going to be that much more in demand. Right. And it's crazy too, because you got to think about like, when you think about employee onboarding and like training and everything, especially in the way that we were doing it, where we were bringing people into like one physical location in a classroom. And I'm sure that's how most other, you know, companies were running their training too as well. You got to ask yourself, like, is that the most responsible thing to do after all of this? Right. Getting a lot of people to travel from a lot of different places, coming and congregating in small rooms where we're all breathing the same air. Like that's a little, you know, that may not be the best thing to do going forward with the world that we're living in now. So it's like, there's no longer going to be remote training is the nice to have thing. It's going to be the need to have, right? I mean, it's the need to have right now, but I think it's definitely going to continue and it's not really going to go away and we're going to flip the switch back to going into the classroom. Like, I don't think that's going to happen. Right?
We used to see maybe a year, 2 years ago that companies would say, you know, if we can do it face to face, we should. If we can't, then maybe we'll have to rely on virtual. And that's going to be flipped. It's like, absolutely do it virtually, remotely, unless we've got a really strong reason to have to get in a room together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's tough. So like I'm trying to think like where I'm like losing my train of thought here. I had a question and then I lost it. Okay. So this is one thing I definitely wanted to get to. So if you were one of those businesses now, right, and you've been completely relying on classroom training done on premise and like you haven't gotten into the idea, oops, I dropped my battery, weird. If you haven't gotten into the idea of, or haven't gotten into the cadence of like doing remote training, and this is something you're totally new to, where would you even start if you were putting yourself in the shoes of like an organization that had trainers, but you've been doing it internally, you've been doing it on premise, but now you have to go remote and you've never done this before? Like, what steps would you take? What advice would you give? Like, how do they even get started?
So finding the right platform is a first step.
Yep.
Because you need to make sure that it's compatible with what your firewalls and, you know, in-company IT people will allow. So Zoom's been really popular. I feel really sorry for Zoom because they've had some bad press recently that I think has been unfair about the security stuff. Without naming names, I've heard that some of the other platforms have had more security breaches.
Sure.
And a lot of companies we're seeing are moving to using Microsoft Teams. Their virtual training, because they've now gone remote anyway because of lockdown, they're having to use often Microsoft Teams just for general day-to-day communication. So it makes sense to just move their virtual remote training onto Microsoft Teams. So that's been, I've been learning loads about Microsoft Teams recently. So finding the right platform is the first step. The next thing, and anyone listening to this is going to say, well, you would say this, Catherine, because it's what your business does, but I hope you would agree, Max.
Yes.
We see that. We had a client just today talk about a face-to-face training supplier that they've been using for years, who've got some really specific technical training that they delivered it virtually, and it just didn't work. And it wasn't because it wasn't possible, it's just they didn't know how to run training virtually, and they just face-to-face slides, talked through them, asked lots of open questions to the group, like, does that make sense? Tumbleweed.
Yep.
And so it really is it's absolutely worth investing some time into giving your trainers the opportunity to learn how to deliver and design, if that's relevant, virtually or remotely.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. Like the big thing that like your training brought to me was confidence, right? And I think if you've been a trainer for a while, you have a certain level of confidence that you get from training. But for a lot of people, and this was true for me too, that confidence comes from the energy that you get being in front of people in a classroom, right? And being sort of the center of attention and being up there and being the one who knows most about whatever subject that you're talking about, and getting that positive feedback and reading the body language, like as you like deliver whatever the knowledge is that you're trying to transfer to people. And the thing is you lose a lot of that stuff when you go remote and you do it like this, because everyone's just staring at you like this. A lot of them are on mute. You don't know what they're saying. You don't know how they're reacting. You can't look at all their faces very quickly, right? And it's tough because a lot of that confidence that you have as a trainer that you get from that energy, you have to find that in different ways, right? And I think that's where a lot of the fear comes from when it comes to like virtual training. Is like if your confidence goes away, your skill set as a trainer starts to be suppressed a little bit. You lose what makes you a little bit, like your personality and like your mannerisms and your typical way of delivering information tends to suffer a bit because you're doing it through this whole different medium. So like I 100% agree that like should you go out and just try it and like see how it feels? Yeah, 100%. You should totally get on a Zoom. Like I think you'll start to realize it's not that different, but definitely seek professional help when it comes to this stuff, because it is so worth it. Like, again, when I went through your training, I had never done a virtual instructor-led training before. And then we had a snow day, literally 3 days after your training. And I remote facilitated our hardest day, our most content-heavy instructor-led session day with 50 people. And it was like the best time I had ever had, right? And, again, it just comes from like having a lot of those tips and tricks of being like familiar with how to use Zoom, understanding how to manage a class, like even when you show me how to do the learner log stuff, right? And for anyone who doesn't know what a learner log is like basically you have a little grid, you write down everyone's name. Yep. Just like Catherine's showing right now. And you put little tally marks when people are participating. And that all of a sudden gives you this like very easy way of like managing who's participating and who's not, instead of being paralyzed by the stress of, am I getting everyone to participate enough, right? So there's like so many little things, like especially that like you taught us, that it's so important to like learn some of these skills. Even if you are an experienced trainer, that doesn't necessarily mean you're an experienced trainer virtually, right? So yeah, I think that's huge.
We've just developed a new model, Max, that you might be interested in getting action going. It's called the 1, 2, 3, 4 process.
Okay, I'm all ears.
I'm sure you're doing it because we did talk about this, but we never really created a model out of it. And it's that whole idea about how you get a conversation going virtually. So step 1 is decide on your question.
Yep.
In advance, as part of your prep, keep it simple and put it on a slide. So that there's no like confusion. There's your question. Step 2 is tell your participants how you want them to respond. So here's the question, respond in the chat box, or respond by pointing or stamping on the screen or sharing an emoji or whatever it might be. But are raising their hand, but telling them this is how to respond. Often what people new to virtual training do is they say things like, so just respond in, I don't know, chat, or just speak up, or they just hope and wait for someone to respond. So
yeah, whatever you want. Yeah,
whatever you want, and then you get nothing.
Yep.
So start another question, put it on a slide, tell people how to respond. Ideally, put that on the slide too. 3 is decide in advance what are you going to do with those responses. And then step 4 is to do it, get that conversation bouncing around. So an example might be, okay, so Max and team, on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident and comfortable do you feel with delivering customer service training virtually? Let's put our number into the chat box. So we get all of our numbers. Great. So Max, I noticed you've put a 6. Can you tell us where that 6 came from? So we started to have a conversation. Max, take a look in the chat box. Who else has got a number that you'd like to find out more about? And then you go, hey, I'd love to hear from Beth. And then we start a conversation. And it's so simple when you know it and you've got it, but it needs to be thought out in advance, that 1, 2, 3, 4 step process.
Yeah. And I love that, because that's one of the bigger things that I've like seen people struggle with in terms of, you know, the new learners that come on, is that like a lot of them, and this goes back to like the whole fact that like these are not the remote learners that you may be used to, right? There's sure, like, are there people who have like been remote and like they're kind of used to like doing remote work and maybe have gone through a remote training before? Sure. But what you need to remember is they did that without all of this outside stress happening, right? Like they did that while being able to separate from their family during the day. Maybe the kids were at school. Maybe they didn't have parents living with them. Maybe there wasn't a global pandemic happening outside that was the scariest thing you saw on the news 24/7. And there's a whole lot of stress like located with that. So there's those people, but then there's also people that have all of those same problems, plus they're joining a company for the first time, plus they've never worked remote before. So people are kind of freaked out at this idea of speaking up when they're on a Zoom call or, you know, whatever system that you're using with a bunch of different people, right? So like there would be plenty of times where I would ask an open-ended question and I would just get crickets, silence, no one saying anything. But I love how you bring that up, because when you start to get better command of all of those different Zoom features you have, like breakout rooms and the chat box and annotations and like the new emojis they have and like all these things, those are way easier ways for people who might not be super comfortable participating in a conversation to contribute to it. And like what I found is when you start with like the easier ways to contribute, like throwing something in a chat box, or even just like raising your hand, like visually or like whatever it may be, when they're comfortable with the technology and like the medium that you're using to deliver your training and communicate with them, that sort of breaks down this barrier that usually makes it a little scary to talk, right? Because they don't want to interrupt. They don't know if they're doing it right. They don't know if they're going to screw anything up. So like they may be a little bit more timid. But yeah, like say, hey, ask an open-ended question. What I always say is kind of similar. I say, throw your answer in the chat. If you're comfortable, come off mute and just kind of tell me, right? And when I don't get anyone coming off mute and tell me, do exactly what you just said. Look in the chat and say, hey, can you extrapolate on that? Can you tell me why? Can you go deeper? And like the more opportunities I think that you have to encourage the participation, even when it starts out lightweight, that just makes it so much easier for people to be comfortable contributing to the conversation, like as you're going through your training. So I love the 1, 2, 3, 4 method. That's awesome.
What you're describing there, Max, is psychological safety, isn't it? It's that idea that people often walk into a virtual classroom, not quite sure what to expect, expecting that it might be a poor relation to a face-to-face experience, albeit a lot of introverts are like, this is great, loving the whole virtual vibe. And it's instantly putting them at ease that this is fine, you know, we're in yes, it's a technical environment in terms of the platform, but it's an in-person environment. And we've even started to stop referring to the opposite of virtual training as being face-to-face. Because we're face-to-face now.
It's the same thing.
Yeah, it's the same. So it's like co-located. And I wanted to ask you a question because, you know, we've talked, and we talked when we did our masterclass together around hybrid events. I think my mind might be changing a little bit about hybrid, and maybe we shouldn't do it.
How are you defining hybrid though?
The hybrid is where you've got some people that are, let's not call them face-to-face, let's call them co-located.
Yep.
So you have some people in the room and some people dialed in virtually.
Yes.
And I thought about, I might still do this. I thought about doing a short video for our YouTube channel on hybrid meetings.
Yep.
And all I was going to say is, hey, here's some tips on how to do hybrid meetings.
Yep.
Let's not do them.
Yeah.
Let's just make everything virtual. You know, if you can't get everyone together, level the playing field.
Yes.
Everyone virtual is my current thinking, and I'd love to get your thoughts on that because you've got experience.
I have very strong feelings about this, and I've literally been having the same conversations with like my manager about it too. So I'm 100% with you. Like the idea of having some people in the classroom and some people remote. Like we did this for a while, and it was, you know, we did our best to create a really good experience for those folks. But at the end of the day, you need to remember, before everyone was remote, the minority of people were remote on Zoom, right? And that's a very isolating experience for those folks. So like if you're in a situation where the majority of your people are in a physical location together and the minority of your learners are on Zoom, they kind of feel left out, right? They don't want to like talk through the Zoom and like have their voice echo throughout the physical room and interrupt you, right? They feel a bit removed from the entire experience.
Looking in through the window.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you even to switch that, right? Like let's say, okay, cool. The majority of people are remote, right? And then you got a couple of people in the classroom. One, that's super awkward, right? Because if you have some people in the classroom, that means your trainer has to be in the classroom, right? To actually have that, you know, physical classroom training experience, right? And that's weird because, you know, it's almost as if you're talking to an audience of a few, because all your focus goes on them, and it's hard to kind of pay attention to the larger group that's remote, right? So I'd say, like, I'm totally on board. Like, when you have everybody remote, it completely levels the playing field. That's the wild thing. And the other thing too is like when you have this mixed blended, you know, or this hybrid like learning model where some people are remote, some people are in the classroom. Whenever you try to do group activities, it's tough because again, the easiest, lowest friction way of doing it is grouping together the people that are physical and then grouping together the people in breakout rooms that are remote. And that's a whole bunch of extra work because you're doing two different ways of like doing group work and group activities together. But that's tough too because it's further isolating the remote and then the on-premise people. And that sucks, right? Whereas like if you just do it all remote, there's a lot of benefits for that. Let's say we are back in the office, right? We have access to the classrooms. We could totally do a hybrid, you know, training again. Wouldn't it make more sense to have everyone be remote and then have your employees that are in the office like go sit with their team, so when they're not on your trainings they can shadow, they can talk to their employees, they can get to know their, you know, their counterparts and the other people on their team, you know, versus just being stuck in a classroom with a couple of people and then kind of awkwardly making their way up there. You know, it's tough. And I'd say like if like it was always very difficult when we had very few remote learners doing the hybrid mix because you had to spend a ton of time ensuring their experience was good because it was all one-off. It wasn't standardized. There wasn't a process that ran itself. And that would cause the in-house learners experience to suffer, right? Because you'd be given tons of attention to a few people and then kind of like your general attention to the people that were in the class. So like, I totally agree with you. Like, I think training honestly should be remote now. The hybrid makes sense to me. And again, is it the responsible thing to do to pack people in a classroom post-COVID, right?
There are probably people listening to this thinking, but I've done loads of hybrid stuff that works really well. Mm-hmm. Guess what? So have I.
Yeah.
So have you.
Yeah.
Is it the best? Is it the right approach? Is it the most fair approach? And I'm with you, Max. I think either, you know, if it's safe and, you know, eventually we get back to being able to do face-to-face training, if everyone can be face-to-face, fine, I guess. But if not, let's be fair to everybody and let's all do it remotely because we know that we can and we know that it's just as, if not more, effective.
You also got to think of how you make it easier for you as a trainer too, because balancing an in-class experience and remote learners, that means that's double the amount of like administrative in between non-training work that you have to do to make the thing run smoothly. Whereas like if you have one Zoom meeting link in your calendar events that everybody just joins and you're just worrying about getting on and talking and facilitating a conversation and not stressed out about all the other little details that come with running one experience side by side with another, you're doing yourself a favor as a trainer, being able to be more present and focus on the stuff that matters and not dealing with all like the administrative BS in the background.
Yeah.
Right.
Even down to where do you look? You know, physically, where are your eyes?
Yeah, totally. If you're in a classroom and you got people zooming in, like you got to find where the cameras are sitting. Maybe you don't have cameras. Maybe they're just listening. And it's like, it adds too many variables that get in the way of you just delivering the best possible experience that you can deliver. Right. So yeah, I totally agree with you.
And I know that in a virtual environment with the right platforms, Zoom's a great example of this, and Microsoft Teams and others, of course, is that the technology can really enhance the experience rather than the concern that people either used to have or people new to virtual learning expected it might get in the way. We've got, when in a face-to-face environment, we're preaching to the converted here, aren't we? But face environment, you might have flip charts and whiteboards and PowerPoint and verbal interaction, but where can you chat? Where can you put? Or you can poll with your hands. But having loads of people collaborating and annotating, there's so much more that you can do. Emojis. How do you do emojis face to face? Get people to actually pull a face. They're not going to do it, but we can use much more in a virtual environment.
And here's the thing: as much as there are some like psychological fears of participating in a remote training classroom, those I think are like way tougher in a physical room too, because a lot of the times, like, you'll have different learner personas, right? You'll have the campers. Those are the people that are just like so excited to be there. You'll have the challengers that just want to challenge every single thing that you said. The prisoners that are just like, oh, why do I have to be here? And then you have the vacationers who are like, I can be here, but I don't have to like pay attention, right? In the physical classroom, different personalities tend to dominate the conversation because some people get uncomfortable being in a room with strangers that they don't know, and that can stifle the way that they participate. But there's just something about doing remote training that, again, levels that playing field, and everyone is kind of, working through the same way of communicating. It's not, you don't have to deal with like the physical presence and domination in a classroom that you see sometimes. Everyone's just behind a computer and you just see their faces and they can communicate all in the same ways. And to me, I've definitely seen more people participate where, understanding their personality, they'd struggle a little bit more in the classroom, right? Yeah. Zoom's the great equalizer, I feel, just because you're giving people all those different avenues to participate, even if they don't like speaking, right? Which you can't do in a classroom. You can't say, all right, we're in the classroom, throw it in the chat. That doesn't exist. Like, you literally have to talk and you have to put yourself out there in front of everybody. And like, maybe you're wrong. That's a little easier to swallow on Zoom than it is when everyone's looking at you and sitting next to you and you're like, ooh, I just answered.
And you can orchestrate the traffic of, sharing the air, as I heard recently. You can orchestrate it and you can, easily bring people in and maybe restrict your over contributors a little bit, and that's where the learner log comes in as well. So you can start to track who needs to be brought in. Or
the over contributors, the person who's always raising their hand. That's the thing. Guess what? Everyone else can hit the raise hand button now, and you can see, all right, you've answered a million times. I'm going to move on to the next person and give them some chance to give them a chance to speak, right? I mean, it is definitely like the great equalizer. There's one other thing I wanted to kind of mention about it, but I can't quite remember what it was. We'll probably get to it at some point.
So what about the whole idea of Zoom fatigue? Again, unfair on Zoom, because the fact that everyone's on platforms the whole time, and then the weekends they're doing family quizzes and all of that. In the process of doing a brain dump for a blog on overcoming Zoom fatigue, or not getting Zoom fatigue, because I don't personally, but I do get why some people might. We talked about this earlier, didn't we, around, delivering all day, whether it's face-to-face or virtually, is always going to be tiring. Psychologically, it doesn't really tire me out, but I'm aware that from a physical perspective, that my hamstrings get tight if I'm sitting down all day, and I've got a bit of a knot in my back. What I do have, I don't know if I've shown you this before, underneath my desk.
Nice. There you go.
I do have my dumbbell.
Yeah.
Is that what it's called? Dumbbell?
Kettlebell.
Kettlebell.
Yeah.
That gives me an opportunity to get up and do some squats and stretches and exercises.
Yeah.
And what I found myself doing is eating standing up.
Mm.
When I was a kid, they used to say that was a bad thing, but I don't think it is. So I have my breakfast standing up and my lunch standing up, because the rest of the day I'm doing a lot of sitting down. And I know a lot of people have got like adjustable desks where you can stand up, which I think is great. I haven't. What do you do to combat that?
Yeah. So it's funny. I was actually just talking about this with my colleagues the other day, is like, because we're going to be doing remote training like through September, right? So like this is going to be what we're doing for a long time. And so I was trying to stress to them the importance of having like a comfortable setup, a comfortable battle station that like you can hang out in for a while and not have it, be uncomfortable, right? I feel really bad. One of my colleagues, like, they're doing their virtual trainings all day from their breakfast bar in a stool, right? And like that can't be comfortable, right? For me, I'm lucky. I got like a nice comfy leather chair here. I invested in one of the standing desks. Yeah, there you go. Like, I invested in one of the standing desks, one of the best things I ever did. But the other thing too is, I think, like, if this is going to be your product, right? Your virtual, facilitations, I think investing in the right equipment to put out like a really good quality product is great as well. Like, I've got this microphone, this Blue Yeti is like the best investment I ever made. It was like $160. And like, my voice quality is that much better. Everyone talks about it on the training. It's kind of funny. They're like, "Oh, you look like you're doing a podcast." I'm like, I know. It's like the 48th time I've heard that today.
I've got one here as well, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. But it comes in handy when you're a trainer and this is what you're doing. And then beyond that, the quality of the content that you can create that's self-paced, such as like videos or audio training content, whatever it is, that becomes that much better, and you can be a better content producer at home. But like the Zoom fatigue thing, like it's definitely real. I'm lucky because I love talking about the subject matter that I train on, right? So for me, it's easy because I'm thoroughly enjoying what I'm talking about, right? And not everybody has that luxury. So when you aren't thoroughly into the subject matter and you can't just sit there and talk about it for hours, the fatigue, I think, really starts to set in a lot quicker, or you start to notice it way easier because like you're talking about something you're not super passionate about, and you've been sitting literally all day and you're super uncomfortable. So like having that comfortable space to work, like investing in a good desk, investing in a good chair, making sure you're taking time to stretch, getting up, walking around. Like the second I get off of training, I stand up and I just immediately start walking around my house just because want to keep the blood flowing and everything. But then I think you also got to think about the learners too, right? Like they're living their lives on Zoom as well. So you got to think when you're doing your training days, does it make sense to have them on a virtual instructor-led training from 9 to 5? No, it doesn't, because they get sick of it just like you do, right? And so what we've done, because we just launched a brand new curriculum, it's a 5-day training curriculum at HubSpot. And since everyone's remote, you have to think about time zones a lot here, because no one's flying out and in the same space and on the same time zone. We've got people in California, we got people down in Bogota, we've got people, all over the world that are taking our trainings. And luckily we're dealing with anywhere from like Pacific time to whatever like an hour ahead of Eastern time is, right? And so what we've done to not only be more cognizant of other people's schedules in different time zones, but also not to make it just a day-long listen to me talk like Zoom experience, we've really leaned heavily into stacking asynchronous e-learning work at the beginning and the end of the day. And then all of our virtual instructor-led training happens within like a 4-hour block in the middle of the day, right? So that's great because now the person in California isn't waking up at 6 a.m. to do a 9 a.m. training, right? They're waking up at a decent time to do the instructor-led stuff. And since their day ends earlier the day before, they have a whole bunch of extra time to work on any of the asynchronous e-learning work that we have before this session, right? And they can just wake up and like do their training at a normal time for them. So like you really got to think about, you as a trainer and managing your own energy, but when you're putting together your curriculum and your training course and everything, you really got to take other people's time zones into consideration. And you really got to do, a lot more e-learning stuff to supplement what you're doing for your virtual instructor-led training, because that you don't want someone looking at a talking head all day, as engaging as you can make it. Yeah.
Yeah, we're doing more and more flipped classrooms. The idea of giving people the content beforehand, consuming their own time, and then when we get together like this, it's an opportunity to explore it or practice it, rather than this is where it's introduced. And that works really effectively. We've had a lot of really positive feedback from people with a more reflective learning style as well. Yeah. It's great. I had a chance to process it. Something else that we're doing also is, for example, when we put people into breakout groups for activities, is building a little bit of extra time in and saying, please have some social time.
Yes.
Just catch up. Yeah, catch up. How are you? Talk about your weekend. Because what often happens when people are working remotely is that they're hopping on Zooms the whole time for meetings, but it's because there's a business need. There's something to talk about that's work related. And when you're not face-to-face, co-located, then you naturally have that social time where you say, should we just get a coffee before we start? And you're chatting about unwork related things. So forcing that in a really positive way.
Yeah. And all that's gone now, right? It's like you can't, like before, when we had everyone in the classroom, like everyone, like you said, they'd go across the street and grab coffee. They'd go have lunch together. They'd go do all these things where they'd socialize, get to know their class, build that, fabric of connection a little bit. And like, they can't do that now. So like, we've had to try to find like different ways of doing that. So for example, on our orientation day, like when we first start, and I would recommend any company out there, like when you're thinking about doing your training, have your orientation day at the beginning. Don't like immediately dive into work and stuff they need to learn. Like spend that first day getting people acclimated and make sure they, leave that day saying, I am so glad I decided to work at this company, right? But like the very first thing that we do in the morning is a virtual coffee session where we literally get everyone in. One person acts as like the breakout room gatekeeper, doorman, right? That's usually my role. And what we do is we have a bunch of other HubSpotters and people on the L&D team come and join us, and we send people into breakout rooms, and all they do is just chat and have coffee and kind of get to know each other in a little more intimate setting, versus immediately being met with like a class of 30 to 50 people and having that being overwhelming, right? And then what we do is we just give them these optional Zoom lunch blocks where it's like, hey, we understand that a lot of your social interaction these days is happening on Zoom. Pretty much all of it is, right? So if you want to have lunch with your coworkers, here's like an easy space that you can go do that. And we've been having a lot of success with it. So like we'll pepper in these little optional morning coffee sessions throughout the week, optional lunch sessions throughout the week. And people like it because it gives them that sense of normal, like going and having lunch with a coworker, having coffee with a coworker, which like, you wouldn't necessarily think to have that be part of your training, but we're very intentional at trying to build in that lightweight social activity throughout training because you need it to happen. You can't just have it be an overwhelming information overload, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it brings me back to this whole idea that I'm convinced, we've not been beaten yet. I'm convinced that whatever you're trying to achieve in a co-located environment, you can achieve it in a virtual environment as well.
100%.
Always the way. If you're creative, if you're flexible, I just haven't found anything that is not doable in a virtual environment yet.
And if I could double click on that, because I think you're 100% correct. Like there's nothing you can, I would say like maybe people who have to like do hands-on work at like fixing physical things, maybe, but like you could deliver that, through e-learning and like virtual stuff just as well, right? But I'll give you a great example why I think that's 100% true, right? So we started so the big modalities that we use is obviously instructor-led training, e-learnings, which is either like a video or a course you go through, and then group activities where like we give them a specific goal and they have to go accomplish it with their group. More recently, we started doing these things we call group workshops, where we're not necessarily saying like, oh, you have to come up with a presentation or you have to do this. We're saying we're going to give you a list of things to learn, and then you're literally just there together to help each other if you need it, right? We started deploying this while we were still co-located face-to-face in the classroom, right? And what I noticed is that like when those groups got together and we said, here's your list of things to do, you're there to help each other out, go work on it, I'd walk around to the different groups and they'd be like kind of located throughout the building, some stayed in the classroom, and they would just be dead silent and not even talking to each other. When we do the same thing with breakout rooms, and I pop in and out of the breakout rooms, the conversation is always happening. There's something weird that happens when everyone's on Zoom. You just don't stop talking to each other, right? And it was the weirdest thing ever, because like the second we switched over and I was like, hey, I noticed that like when we did this all remotely, like people are actually talking and they're doing it and they're getting it done. It spurs this level of interaction with each other that we just didn't see when we were doing it in the physical space. Yeah. It's nuts. It's crazy. Right. Yeah. But like, I totally agree with you. Like there's nothing that you can do, you know, face to face that you can't do or even do better virtually, you know? And I think there's a stigma that just so many people don't believe that. Like they think training, they immediately think physical classroom, right? And I don't think they should, especially not in the day, like not in like today's world, you know?
And with 5G coming through and virtual reality, so you know, you talked about physically taking things apart or whatever. Rolls-Royce, for a few years now, have got this, you know, they put the goggles on, it's virtual reality, and you can take an engine apart virtually. Even if you drop a screw, you can look down and find it and pick it up. It's that intricate. So
you have the tools. Like that's kind of the whole point. Like you have the tools. It's just like, do you want to put the effort into to make it happen, right? And you know, going back to like your earlier point on kind of like how you were seeing like the influx of all these different companies. Like it's interesting because this global pandemic has had so many different effects, like obviously overwhelmingly negative, but like a lot of strange positive ones too as well, right? For example, I've never been closer to my team than I am now, right? Because we're talking all the time on Zoom. We're collaborating better than we ever have before. You remove the commute and the stress of that out of your day, all of a sudden you can focus on a lot more things. But then like what's crazy is like there's some companies that are obviously, unfortunately, going out of business, right? But then there's other companies that because of this global shift are thriving and hiring more people than ever and having to do it completely virtually, right? And I feel like there's just going to be a lot of people out there that are going to kind of like struggle with like, how do we, you know, we're an essential service or we're like, you know, a business that is set up to do well when things like this are happening. Like, how do we actually get started onboarding these folks? And I think it's just something that a lot of people need to start thinking about now because they probably weren't thinking about it before. They weren't anticipating the influx and they weren't anticipating that they had to do the training remotely, right? So I think like one of the biggest things, you know, I can say to those folks is that, you know, just like everything that we've talked about, your training can absolutely be better online and virtually if you put the time and effort into making it happen. And you don't need an expensive learning management system to do it. You don't need like all these crazy tools. You really just need passionate people that like talking about the subject matter, get a little bit of extra help in terms of, you know, learning how to hone their original training skills into virtual facilitation, and you can make it happen. It's not that bad. Anything that you could have done in the classroom, you can do it virtually, for sure.
And you know what? I can see a tail in the background. You know, you don't get pets making an appearance other side. I can see a grey tail.
Yeah.
Is it a cat or a dog?
It's a dog. It's my Aussie cattle dog, Ray.
Oh, boy or girl?
She's a girl. Yep.
What's her name?
Ray. Like from Star Wars. And it's funny because I have a coworker who has a similar dog, and his name's Kylo, like Kylo Ren from Star Wars. Really strange. But I mean, this, for example, right? Dog in the background, fairly messy basement that I'm sitting in. You were mentioning earlier how like we're letting people into our lives now, and everyone's seeing like the idea of work in our personal lives has completely molded together, right? And I'm just wondering how, I mean, and maybe you've seen this, like I'm just wondering how much businesses are like being tolerant of that, if you will, like and really stressing out on maintaining this like unrealistic level of what you'd call professionalism over Zoom. Like, what have you seen there? Like, are people like still really sensitive to that stuff, or are people getting like a little more tolerant of it? Like,
it's it's a really good point. It's completely changed. So even just looking back 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I might have my running gear on, but I'd put a shirt over the top before I did it, because I think I'm going to go for a run later. Whereas now I'm like, I recorded a video for our YouTube channel the other day in my running gear because that's what I was wearing, and nobody cares. I run virtual workshops just in the last couple of weeks where one person had a giraffe onesie on because they were cold and it kept them warm. And we've had kids make appearances sitting on their parents' lap, waving to the group. And one of my cats is here right now. She regularly jumps across and walks along the desk, and nobody cares. If anything, they enjoy it. What people are wearing, what's going on in our background, what we look like, our lights. It's just, the world has changed, and it was moving that way anyway. I think, but this has just accelerated it all now. What is professional? Just a quick anecdote. I used to do some work for another training organization that asked all of their trainers not to drink tea or coffee during virtual workshops because it was unprofessional.
Interesting. Yeah, that's tough. That's a really tough one. And like, one of the reasons that I bring it up is that, so like, something that I've noticed is like, especially for people who aren't used to working in the virtual environment, right? They don't know what like the rules are, if you will. And not that there necessarily, I think, are a ton of like hard and fast rules. Like, that has to do a lot with your company culture and, how remote friendly you are and like all, like how much of a normal thing it is. But I think a lot of the people come to your trainings, and like, we're talking about your learners right now, they may come to your trainings being like, oh, like, how should I be presenting myself? Like, I literally had someone ask me what the dress code is for the Zooms. And I was like, dude, I'm wearing basketball shorts. Like, don't worry about it. I want you to be comfortable. But I think one of the best things you can do as a trainer, right, is eliminate all of the things that get people stressed out, because there's already so many things that are stressing people out. Again, the pandemic's happening. They're taking care of a family member. They have their kids running around. They're also being a teacher. They're joining a new job. There's all these stressors that stop them from having a good learning experience. So something that I've been doing is basically, and it's like kind of silly, but like making people as comfortable as possible with the fact that we know you've got all this stuff going on at home. You've got your kids there. It's okay if they come and join you for a training. I use the joke. I say, like, if your curious uncle wants to come sit in and see what we're doing, that's totally fine. And like, well, no one's going to invite their uncle or their dad or their mom to like come look at the training. If they know it's okay, there is something with that just makes them relax a little bit more. And the more I think we can get people to relax during these trainings and not have such an uptight expectation of how people present themselves on it, and just know that there's no separation between work and personal life, that's only going to have a benefit for your learner, because when they're comfortable, they're going to retain a lot more information and they're going to have a better experience. So all I'm saying here for anyone watching is just don't be too hard on your learners in terms of what they're wearing, what's going on in the background. Tell them it's okay to turn off your video to go deal with your child or your barking dog or whatever it is. And just like remove that stress as much as you can, because it's only going to improve their experience, right? And everyone's going to have a better time.
So true. We usually now say at the start of our workshops, please don't apologize for anything that happens in the background, because we've all got it going on. And I was running a masterclass yesterday, and the group actually themselves, without my prompting, agreed that if anybody apologized for anything, they had to put £1 in a pot. And then when all of this is over, they're going to use that to go out for drinks.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. And I also, like, even, you can hear my dog right now. But like, one thing I'll say again to like level that playing field. Ray, come on. Are you okay? I'm going to let her out really quick. Give me 1 second. We can edit this part out.
Oh, you should leave it in. This is as practicing.
This is Zoom, people.
This is it.
Probably hears the baby crying upstairs. Again, this is what we're all dealing with. Like, one of those other things that I do to kind of, again, remove as much stress as possible. And like, I get that I'm comfortable doing this. I'm not saying everyone could be comfortable doing this. And like, maybe this is not the best thing to do when you have a large class, but definitely when like I have a group of learners anywhere between like maybe, 1 to 15-ish, right? What I'll tell everybody at the beginning is like, hey, listen, feel free to interrupt me at any time. It's not a big deal. Like if you're missing something or you don't quite understand the concept or you lose me somewhere, like I don't want you to fall behind. It is 100% okay for you to get off mute and say, Max, stop, right? And ask your question. I'm not going to be offended. It's totally okay. And while a lot of people don't do that, it still just ensures a level of comfort that it's okay to speak up and it's okay to participate, right? Obviously, if you have those folks who are, ask a billion questions or challenge you or anything, you adjust that strategy a little bit. But just to get everybody comfortable, like that's your number one job when you first get on there, right? Make sure they know how to use Zoom and make sure they are comfortable talking just as if they were right in front of you, because they are technically, right? Yeah. But there's something about seeing all the faces on the screen and seeing the trainer kind of go through and doing their thing where there's this just inherent blocker to like speak up if you need to. And the last thing you want people doing is falling behind because they can't walk up to you at the end of class and say, oh, I got lost on this thing. I had a question, right? They have to make a Zoom meeting with you and it's like a whole thing. So like allowing them to kind of stop you to make sure they're, keeping up and having a good time and understanding everything. You got to like instill that like right at the beginning or else they're not going to be comfortable doing it.
The moment they walk into your virtual classroom, that's it. Just as you were in a co-located event, as soon as somebody walks in, you look up, you smile, you shake the hand.
Exactly.
Whether handshaking will ever come back, who knows?
Maybe.
But you get that, that's the point, isn't it? We need to give people that same experience in a virtual environment, if not more purposefully, so they're instantly put at ease, they're comfortable, they know that they're in safe hands and they can relax and just get the best out of their time.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, hey, Catherine, we're just about out of time right now. So I wanted to say thank you, but for anyone like watching this that is getting into or, taking their training remotely, maybe you're just getting started, maybe you're, maybe you've been doing it, but like you're not so comfortable with the virtual facilitation, whether it's yourself or your team, like what's the best way for people to get in touch with you and, seek out professional help from your team?
If you Google the virtual training team, you will find us. We've got a YouTube channel. We've got loads and loads of resources on our website, blogs, articles. We want to help you be your best. We know that the whole world is going virtual. We just want to help you make it work. If you don't want to pay for our resources, use the free resources that we've got. It takes a bit longer to get your head around it all, but we've got loads of stuff. And going right back at you, Max, if anyone checks Max out on LinkedIn, you've got some amazing recordings, podcasts, a load of tips about how to take your training virtually from an onboarding perspective. So yeah.
And that wouldn't have been there if it wasn't for you. So anyone watching this, hire Catherine and her team. I can't stress that enough. They're absolutely amazing. I wouldn't be comfortable doing any of this stuff if it wasn't for the one masterclass that I spent with her. So please definitely check them out. It's worth every penny, whatever it costs.